Have you ever heard of a humble truck driver who's secretly trained by the FBI? In our thrilling story, you'll witness the heart-stopping moment when Rebecca Morgan, once an ordinary face in a bustling New York crowd, finds herself surrounded by a dangerous biker gang. The city's industrial outskirts become a battleground as she is forced to reveal her elite skill set in a desperate fight for survival. Bullets fly, engines roar, and loyalties are tested in the heat of the moment. But how will this high-stakes confrontation end? Tune in to discover whether Rebecca can outsmart the bikers once and for all, and to see if justice truly prevails when one person decides to stand her ground against overwhelming odds. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and follow us for more gripping stories. Your support helps us continue sharing these riveting adventures with the world. Rebecca Becca Morgan hadn't always imagined herself behind the wheel of a massive 18-wheeler, rumbling along the highways that snaked through Manhattan's concrete canyons. But life was unpredictable, and she found that the slow, methodical rhythm of long-distance trucking appealed to the piece of her soul that needed solitude after years of high-stakes intensity. Standing at 5'8", with a wiry build and a quick, observant gaze, Becca appeared to most bystanders as nothing more than a hardworking, everyday woman pushing through the demands of a trucker's life. Her olive-green eyes often hid a past that few people ever suspected. In her previous life, as she liked to call it, Becca had spent 6 relentless years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She had been an exceptional trainee and later on, a field agent who quickly rose through the ranks due to her innate abilities. Her marksmanship was near legendary in the field training center. Her knack for reading micro-expressions on suspects' faces was uncanny, and her willingness to go above and beyond had earned her both respect and a series of commendations. But underneath the accolades and the adrenaline rush of the job, something weighed her down. She began questioning whether the relentless cat-and-mouse game with criminals was truly where her heart lay. One defining mission pushed her to the breaking point, a protracted undercover operation involving a dangerous arms-dealing network. She had to live under an alias for months, navigating a precarious web of suspicion and betrayal, never fully able to let her guard down. The stress chipped away at her piece by piece. After concluding the case, she made a startling announcement to her superiors. She was resigning. Many of her colleagues urged her to stay. Some tried to tempt her with desk jobs or promotions. But Becca's mind was made up. She needed peace, a chance to breathe, and a more tangible sense of personal freedom. It was one of her old FBI friends who suggested trucking. He joked that if she wanted to disappear into the wide-open roads, becoming a trucker might be just the ticket. The idea stuck. After some additional training and a few stints with smaller delivery companies, she saved enough to buy a used Kenworth truck, refurbishing it into a reflection of her own personality. Sturdy, unassuming, but always ready for anything. It was an unconventional transition, sure, but it gave her the space she needed. Time alone, freedom to explore the country's nooks and crannies, and a semblance of anonymity. On the surface, her day-to-day routine was straightforward. She'd wake up in her cozy cabin, often in a rest area or truck stop parking lot, check her schedule, and embark on the day's route. The hustle and bustle of New York City wasn't always on her itinerary, but a few reliable contracts in the area kept her coming back to the city's neon-lit skyline. As she maneuvered her rig through narrow streets and chaotic intersections, she felt confident in her ability to handle challenges, on the road or off it. Still, she couldn't have predicted that her past skills would be tested in an unexpected confrontation that would shake her tranquil world. On a crisp morning in late spring, Becca found herself stopping at a small truck stop just beyond the city limits, a final breather before she plunged into New York City's swirling traffic. Tall sycamore trees lined the edge of the parking lot, offering a bit of shade. The place had a sleepy, almost nostalgic feel, reminding her of out-of-the-way diners she'd visited in quieter states, far from the roar of Manhattan. She hopped down from the commune, noticing how the air still retained a slight chill that promised rain later. After checking her truck's tires and latches, she made her way inside, drawn by the promise of a warm breakfast and a decent cup of coffee. The interior was a standard roadside diner scene, a row of swivel stools by a scratched-up counter, the clatter of dishes, and an assortment of regulars sipping coffee in booths. Becca chose a corner table to keep an eye on the room, a habit from her FBI days that she still hadn't shaken. She exchanged polite nods with a few truckers she recognized by face, if not by name, then settled down to skim through her route notes on a tablet. Between sips of coffee, she couldn't help noticing a small group of bikers who walked in. They weren't fully decked out in typical biker gang regalia, but she saw enough signs to raise an eyebrow. Matching leather vests with a stylized patch on the back, something that looked like a flaming skull with crossed pistons, and a certain swagger in their step that bespoke aggression. They scanned the place as though evaluating it for potential threats, and then they chose seats close enough for her to overhear bits of their conversation. Snippets of their talk were concerning, references to shipping routes, payoffs, and a territory expansion. None of it pointed directly to their intentions, but Becca felt a twinge of wariness prickling at the back of her neck. It brought her back to those days when she'd be eavesdropping on criminals under the guise of small talk, gleaning valuable intel from casual remarks. Though she'd left the bureau behind, her instincts were still razor sharp. She finished her breakfast, settled the bill, and slipped outside. She needed to keep her schedule, but she also felt the uneasy sensation that these bikers might have some bigger plan in the works. As she opened the door to her cab, she spotted them emerging from the diner, too. One of them was a tall, lanky man with scraggly hair peeking out from under a bandana. He gave her a long, speculative look. She glanced away, feigning disinterest, then climbed into her rig and fired up the engine. Driving off, she turned on the radio to drown out her unease. Maybe it was just her overactive imagination, a holdover from years of being trained to suspect the worst in every situation. Still, she couldn't completely dismiss her instincts, especially not with the talk of shipping routes. Her cargo today included electronics bound for a warehouse in Queens, a valuable haul, no doubt. Glancing at her side mirror, she saw the group of bikers mounting their motorcycles, forming a small convoy and heading out. Their direction wasn't the same as hers, at least not yet, but the uneasy feeling persisted, foreshadowing that her path might cross theirs again under far less friendly circumstances. The streets of New York City were as hectic as ever. Yellow cabs sliced through the lanes like darting fish, and throngs of pedestrians seemed to occupy every inch of sidewalk. Delivery vans double-parked without a second thought, and the noise of jackhammers merged with the echo of car horns in a cacophony that overwhelmed the senses. Becca navigated this urban jungle with practiced ease, mentally adjusting to last-minute lane changes and unexpected detours caused by construction. She followed her GPS, which directed her to the industrial outskirts of Queens, near a vast warehouse complex where she was scheduled to drop off her shipment. As she neared her destination, she tried to shake off the lingering tension from that morning's encounter. The city's density was a comfort in a strange way, making it seem less likely that any gang of bikers would have the nerve to cause trouble in broad daylight. But even as she reassured herself, she noticed something in her side mirror. Two motorcycles weaving in and out of traffic, a few vehicles behind her. For a heartbeat, she thought she recognized the patch from the diner. The rational side of her brain said it could be any bikers, but the pit in her stomach told her otherwise. Pulling onto a wide, pothole-littered avenue, she came to a red light and paused. The roaring sound of motorcycle engines drew closer. One bike advanced on her left side, the other on her right, effectively flanking her truck. Her heart rate picked up, but she maintained her composure. Rolling down the window slightly, she risked a quick glance and sure enough saw that same flaming skull patch. The rider on the left, bandana guy, met her gaze through his tinted visor, then revved his engine tauntingly. She breathed deeply, sliding her hand toward the cell phone on the dashboard. Another skill from the FBI. Never show alarm or panic. Let the adversary underestimate you. The light turned green, and she eased her truck forward, hoping they might just be messing around. Instead, they rode in tandem, blocking her from changing lanes. Traffic was thick, so she didn't have many options. Up ahead, a sign indicated an upcoming exit that led to a more deserted stretch of road. If they forced her onto that route, it would be the perfect place for an ambush. For a moment, her mind flashed to the FBI training facility. She could practically hear her instructor drilling in the importance of calm under pressure. She decided to remain on her planned course to the warehouse, where private security and employees might be present. But the bikers had other ideas. At the next intersection, they angled their bikes in front of her, ignoring honks and curses from other motorists. One rider gestured aggressively for her to veer right, toward an industrial zone notorious for sparse traffic and abandoned lots. She could see a third motorcycle in her mirror now, trailing behind the rig like a vulture. Becca's grip tightened on the wheel. She could almost feel the adrenaline starting to pump through her veins, stirring the dormant part of her that was trained to handle violent criminals. This was no mere coincidence or random display of road rage. The question wasn't if they were going to attack, but when and how severely. Taking a controlled breath, she tried to formulate a plan. She had to keep her cargo safe, protect herself, and avoid a situation spiraling into a lethal confrontation in the middle of the city. Becca's truck lumbered into the industrial zone, an area filled with looming warehouses, chain-link fences, and deserted side streets. The sun glinted off broken glass in the gutters, and the sporadic graffiti scrawled across corrugated metal walls only heightened the sense of neglect. The GPS indicated she should go straight for another half-mile before making a left turn onto a road leading directly to her delivery location. She glanced at the cell phone on her dashboard, debating whether to call the authorities. Then again, 911 in New York City would prompt a barrage of questions, and the officers might not arrive swiftly enough to help her. The roar of engines behind her confirmed the bikers were closing in. By now, the traffic had thinned out considerably. She shifted gears, accelerating to see if she could outdistance them, but they were too nimble. Every time she gained ground, they managed to weave through gaps or jump curbs, maintaining their menacing presence around her truck. Ahead, she noticed an intersection with a blinking yellow traffic light and decided this might be her last chance to turn off onto a road that wasn't nearly abandoned. However, the two bikers on either side accelerated to box her in, steering her away from the safer route. She had spent years learning how to read group dynamics. Who was in charge, who was the enforcer, who was the wild card. By their maneuvering, she guessed Bandana Guy was a ringleader, or at least someone high enough in the group's pecking order to call the shots. The others seemed to position themselves in ways that complemented his movements, creating a coordinated threat. The question lingered. What was their objective? Did they plan to steal her cargo, or was there something more personal at play? Desperation fueled her next decision. She swung the truck hard to the right, aiming to graze the corner of a concrete divider in hopes of scattering the bikers. The abrupt move caused her rig to lurch, and the squealing of tires echoed loudly. One biker swerved, narrowly avoiding a collision, but Bandana Guy stayed calm, deftly leaning his bike to avoid impact while maintaining speed. Now it was clear. They had practiced such maneuvers before. A sign read "No Outlet" as she rumbled onto a dilapidated stretch of asphalt. Fences on either side were topped with razor wire, and the windows of the surrounding buildings were boarded up. It was the perfect place for an ambush, hidden from most eyes, practically abandoned, and big enough for several vehicles to maneuver. Her heart pounded, but her expression remained stoic. As if on cue, more motorcycles poured into the street from a side alley. She counted at least 4 additional riders, forming a half circle in front of her. The rig's brakes hissed as she slowed to a stop, weighing her options. She could try to barrel through them, risking life and property. Or she could let them think they had her cornered. The FBI agent inside her whispered to remain calm, gather intel, and strike when the odds tipped in her favor. Carefully, she removed her seatbelt and slid open the side window. Her right hand inched beneath the seat, where she kept a concealed firearm. She wasn't looking for a kill or be killed scenario, but she refused to be a victim, especially not in a situation that reeked of a planned heist or worse. Bandana Guy dismounted his bike first, kicking out its stand in a casual, almost lazy manner. One by one, the other bikers followed suit, forming a rough semicircle around the front of the truck. Their combined presence was intimidating. Leather vests with that flaming skull emblem, heavy boots scraping the ground, the crackle of radio static from somewhere within the group. Becca kept her left hand visible on the open window ledge, while her right hovered near her concealed weapon beneath the seat. The tall biker ambled closer, his head tilted in a faux-friendly gesture. "We've been watching you, sweetheart," he drawled, his tone dripping with condescension. "Got a nice rig here. Mind if we take a look inside?" His grin revealed crooked teeth, and she noticed a deep scar running across his temple. Becca forced a polite smile she didn't feel. "I'm on a tight schedule," she replied, letting a slight tremor into her voice to make herself appear vulnerable. "What do you want?" He looked to his fellow riders, then back at her with an air of cocky assurance. "Your cargo, obviously. And maybe your wallet. If you're nice, we'll leave you here in one piece." His companions chuckled darkly. She could feel her pulse beating in her ears, but she stayed outwardly composed. Look, I'm just a truck driver trying to make a living. You don't want trouble? I'll let you have whatever you want if you just let me go. That line was straight from her FBI training manual on negotiation tactics. Appear compliant and buy time. A stocky biker with a thick beard chimed in. She's being too polite, boss. Let's do this quick. Pop open the cargo, get the goods, and bounce. He tapped his boot impatiently on the ground, clearly itching for action. Bandana Guy raised a hand to silence him. Hold up, Marty. Something's off here. He peered up at Becca, his sharp gaze scrutinizing her. She realized that her calm demeanor might be setting off his alarm bells. You don't look as scared as you should be. He took a step closer, resting his hand on the handle of a pistol holstered at his side. Either you got a death wish, or you think you can take us on. Inside the cab, Becca's right hand tightened around the grip of her concealed handgun. She measured the distance from the truck door to the group. If this escalated into gunfire, she had the advantage of partial cover behind the doorframe and the element of surprise. But these men were armed, numerous, and evidently used to violence. Any misstep on her part could end in tragedy. I'm just trying to keep my cool, she replied, making sure her voice wavered slightly. But if you're going to rob me, can we get it over with? It was a risk. Sounding too eager might confirm their suspicion that she wasn't just another frightened driver. Bandana Guy narrowed his eyes, sliding his hand to rest on his gun more prominently. Pop the door open and step out real slow, he ordered. His accomplices angled themselves, forming a threatening cluster. Becca took a breath, scanning the surroundings for any last-minute exit strategy. The road behind her was blocked by two more bikes. The fences on either side were too high for a quick climb. With no other immediate option, she cracked open the truck door, deliberately moving in a slow, exaggerated manner. The tension in the air was nearly tangible. She was about to step out, to face them on equal footing, but deep down, she was already preparing for the moment she'd turn the tables. Because beneath the unassuming exterior of a truck driver was a highly trained FBI agent who knew exactly how to dismantle threats like these. Becca carefully lowered herself from the driver's seat, scanning each biker's stance and hand placement in her peripheral vision. She kept her hands raised, palms outward, in a universal sign of surrender, though her right hand was only inches from her concealed weapon. The asphalt felt gritty under her boots as she stepped away from the truck. The late morning sun cast elongated shadows across the rundown street, giving the scene an almost cinematic tension. Bandana Guy, presumably their leader, smirked, clearly relishing what he believed to be the upper hand. That's it. Now let's see what goodies you've got for us. He gestured for one of his underlings to move toward the cargo doors at the rear of the trailer. The moment the bearded biker, Marty, turned his back to approach the truck, Becca struck. It started with a single, fluid motion. Her right hand dove to her hip, retrieving the firearm in a swift, practiced draw. She aimed for Bandana Guy's dominant hand, where he gripped his pistol and squeezed the trigger. A deafening crack cut through the tense silence. The shot was precise. Bandana Guy's gun flew from his hand, clattering onto the pavement. Chaos erupted instantly. The other bikers scrambled, some reaching for their own weapons, others ducking behind their bikes for cover. But Becca's FBI training had prepared her for such a scenario. While their attention splintered, she pivoted to neutralize the next threat. Another gunshot, carefully aimed at the front tire of a bike where a biker crouched behind. The tire popped with a hiss, forcing him to recoil, losing precious seconds. "Drop your weapons," she barked, her voice echoing with the authority of years in law enforcement. "I'll only warn you once." The swirling dust from the sizzling tire hung in the air, mingling with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Two bikers responded immediately, tossing their guns aside, fear etched on their faces. They hadn't anticipated that the easy mark would transform into a gun-toting professional. But Marty, the bearded one, raised his revolver in a shaking hand. Before he could fire, Becca snapped off another round that struck the ground near his boots. He froze, eyes wide with shock. Meanwhile, Bandana Guy clutched his bleeding hand, rage contorting his features. He managed to scramble toward his dropped weapon with his uninjured arm. Becca kicked the pistol away, leveling her own gun at him. She locked eyes with him, her gaze cold and unwavering. "You picked the wrong truck driver," she said, her voice laced with a quiet, lethal certainty. For a moment, no one moved. The entire group of bikers was unprepared for such a swift counterattack. Some stared in disbelief, hands hovering near their holsters, unsure whether to escalate or surrender. The tension hung in the air like a volatile charge, ready to explode at the slightest spark. Becca risked a quick glance at her surroundings, ensuring none of the bikers were trying to flank her. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, sharpening her senses. This was her element, the chaos of an armed standoff that she'd rehearsed so many times during FBI drills. Even so, her heart hammered with the reality that this was no controlled simulation. One wrong move, a single missed shot, could be catastrophic. Slowly, as if finally coming to terms with the dire situation, the bikers began to lower their weapons or toss them aside. Bandana Guy's eyes flickered with hatred, but the pain in his hand and the presence of a loaded gun aimed at his chest forced him into submission. Becca took a steadying breath, aware that she gained the upper hand for now, but also aware that escape was far from guaranteed. "Kick the guns over here," Becca commanded, nodding at the pile of discarded weapons scattered across the pavement. One by one, the bikers slid their pistols, knives, and even a couple of brass knuckles toward her. The makeshift arsenal scraped against the concrete, coming to rest in a small cluster near her boots. She kept her own weapon trained on Bandana Guy, the clear leader. He grimaced, sweat beading on his forehead. "You'll pay for this," he snarled, voice tight from the pain in his injured hand. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "That's funny," Becca replied, her tone clipped. "I was about to say the same to you." She motioned with her gun for them to back up against the chain-link fence. "Everyone against the fence, hands where I can see them." Though reluctant, they complied. She confiscated a spare bandana from one of the bikers and quickly used it to bind the leader's bleeding hand, applying pressure to stem the blood flow, while making it clear she wasn't about to let him bleed out. Even as she did so, she never let her guard down. Her eyes continuously flicked to the others, scanning for signs of aggression. While she had momentary control, her mind raced through the next steps. She could call the police, but by the time they arrived, these guys might try something desperate. Alternatively, she could try to force them to leave, but that risked them regrouping and coming back in greater numbers. A piece of her wanted to radio in her old FBI contacts, but she'd left that life behind, and time was of the essence. The stocky biker, Marty, had his hands raised high, his face drained of color. "We didn't know who you were, lady," he muttered, voice shaking. "We just heard there was a valuable haul moving through the city, and we wanted a slice." He swallowed hard. "Let us walk, and we'll never bother you again." "Shut up," snapped Bandana Guy, shooting Marty a furious glare. Then returning his gaze to Becca, he tried a new tack, feigned diplomacy. "Let's make a deal. You drive away, we walk away. Nobody calls the cops, and we forget this ever happened." She considered the proposition. It was tempting to end it here, but her instincts warned her that these bikers might not honor any gentleman's agreement. She could almost see the gears turning in Bandana Guy's mind, planning how to retaliate once she lowered her weapon. Her best bet might be to secure them long enough for the authorities to arrive. Yet the idea of tangling with the NYPD, facing a barrage of questions about her advanced skills and possibly revealing her FBI past, made her hesitate. Then another complication arose. The distant rumble of more motorcycle engines reverberated through the narrow streets. Reinforcements? Her gut twisted. If another wave of bikers joined the fray, she'd be outnumbered, gun or no gun. She had to make a decisive move now. With her foot, she scooped one of the discarded weapons, a smaller handgun, toward the sewer drain at the edge of the curb, letting it clatter out of reach. She glanced around, noticing a faint wisp of dust rising from the far end of the block, hinting at approaching motorcycles. Time was running out. She needed a plan, and fast. Locking eyes with Bandana Guy, she spoke with deadly seriousness. "You're going to lie face down, all of you. If anyone even twitches the wrong way, they'll regret it." Her words hung in the air like a final ultimatum as the roar of approaching engines grew ever louder. As the reinforcements' engines thundered closer, Becca's mind clicked into overdrive. She had to exploit whatever advantage she could find in this desolate environment. The fence, the abandoned warehouses, and even the battered vehicles along the curb were potential tools at her disposal. She needed more than just her gun to keep these bikers pinned down when their allies arrived. Motioning with her firearm, She led the subdued bikers toward a spot where the fence jutted out at an awkward angle. Then, in a rapid series of movements, she kicked over two of their motorcycles, creating a makeshift barrier. The heavy bikes crashed onto the asphalt, forming an obstacle that might at least slow down anyone approaching from behind. But no sooner had she done this than the roar of additional bikes intensified. Half a dozen more riders careened into view at the far end of the block, their silhouettes silhouetted against the glaring sun. As they drew nearer, she could see they bore the same flaming skull patch, though some wore additional insignias that hinted at higher ranks within the gang. They braked suddenly, forming a line of revving engines, an intimidating show of force. Becca could practically taste the tension in the air. One false move, and this could turn into a full-scale shootout. She glanced at the subdued bikers by the fence. Fear flickered in their eyes as though even they knew their reinforcements might spark a massacre. She took two measured steps backward to position herself near the open driver's door of her truck, which offered partial cover. A new figure emerged from the pack of reinforcements. A burly man with broad shoulders, dark sunglasses, and a voice that boomed over the engines. "What the hell's going on here?" he demanded, cutting the throttle of his custom chopper. He noticed Bandana Guy cradling his injured hand in the scattered pile of firearms. His expression hardened. "They messed with the wrong person," Becca answered, her voice resonating with unwavering confidence. She kept her gun aimed at the group near the fence but flicked her gaze toward the newcomers. "Unless you want more of the same, I suggest you all back off." The burly man's eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses, his massive hands tightening on the handlebars. He surveyed the scene, the pinned-down bikers, the turned-over motorcycles, and the fact that this solitary truck driver had apparently gotten the drop on his entire crew. "You don't know who we are, lady," he growled. "We run these streets. You'll regret this." Becca allowed a trace of a smile. "You're not the first gang I've run into," she replied cryptically, memories of FBI raids flashing through her mind. "Now, unless you want to end up like them, leave." For a split second, the burly man looked like he might order an all-out assault, but the sight of his men's bloodied and disarmed comrades gave him pause. He muttered a curse under his breath, then turned to one of his lieutenants. "Grab Ricky," he said, pointing to Bandana Guy, "and the others. We're pulling back." Relief coursed through Becca, but she kept her gun raised, ensuring they understood she wouldn't hesitate to fire if they tried anything. "This isn't over," the burly leader warned, jabbing a thick finger in her direction. The new arrivals slowly circled around, their bikes spitting gravel as they maneuvered to pick up the injured and gather abandoned weapons. Tension crackled like static electricity, but no one made a move for her. Within minutes, the reinforcements and the original group were retreating down the street, engines roaring in frustration. Becca exhaled a trembling breath, but her mind quickly shifted to the next concern. They might be regrouping, or they might attempt to track her. She needed to get out of here, and fast, before the police or a bigger wave of bikers arrived, turning this quiet industrial corner into a war zone. Once the bikers had rumbled out of sight, Becca holstered her weapon, feeling the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Her surroundings suddenly seemed quieter. The clang of a distant freight train underscoring the eerie calm. She righted the motorcycle she had toppled, just enough to maneuver her truck out of the makeshift barricade she'd created. Then she climbed back into the driver's seat, started the engine, and let the powerful rumble of her rig fill her with a sense of determination. She might have outwitted them this time, but she doubted they would let this go. The question now was how to proceed. Delivering her cargo to the Queen's warehouse remained a priority. Failing to do so would raise questions and might jeopardize her contract. But if the biker gang was monitoring major roads, she risked another confrontation. Her mind raced, weighing the options. She could try to vanish into the city's endless sprawl, or she could contact some of her old bureau colleagues for backup. Neither choice was ideal. After all, the whole point of leaving the FBI was to avoid this kind of heat. With a resigned sigh, she picked up her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, finally landing on a name, Special Agent Karen Lee. Karen had been Becca's partner on several undercover ops and was one of the few people she trusted implicitly. She tapped the call button, half expecting it to go straight to voicemail. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Becca?" Karen's tone was a mix of surprise and relief. "It's been ages. Everything okay?" "Not exactly," Becca admitted, forcing a humorless chuckle. "I've got a situation. It involves a biker gang that tried to hijack my truck. They didn't succeed, but they'll probably come after me again. She heard Karen inhale sharply. Where are you? Becca gave her the approximate location, an industrial area on the outskirts of Queens, and summarized the standoff. She kept the details short, omitting the fact that she'd shot the gang leader's hand. But Karen wasn't naive. She could read between the lines. Look, I can't dispatch a full team, not on such short notice, and especially not without an official request. But I might be able to pull a few strings, get some local PD to watch for suspicious biker activity. In the meantime, you need a safe place to lay low. Agreed, Becca said. She glanced around, spotting a side street that led away from the main industrial strip. I'm going to deliver this load. After that, can you help me find somewhere secure? Karen hesitated. All right, but be careful. These gangs can be bigger than they look. They have alliances, and their networks run deep. You're lucky you got out of there alive. I'm aware. Thanks, Karen. Becca ended the call, a strange mix of relief and lingering tension. She was on her own for the moment, but at least she had a lifeline if things escalated further. Easing the truck forward, she navigated a maze of narrow streets, finally arriving at the warehouse complex. The yard manager was surprised to see her flustered expression and the fresh scuffs on her trailer. She offered a curt explanation, a near run-in with vandals, and quickly signed the delivery paperwork. Whatever the manager thought, he kept it to himself, handing her a receipt and waving her off. Pulling out of the loading bay, she noted the time on the dashboard. Less than an hour had passed since the confrontation, but it felt like an eternity. Her next priority was finding a secure location. If the bikers had any sense, they'd try to track her movements or set an ambush on the roads out of Queens. She considered heading deeper into the city, where police presence was heavier, but the congestion and unpredictability of Manhattan didn't appeal to her. Ultimately, she decided to trust Karen. For now, it was time to lie low, restock her energies, and prepare for the possibility that the worst was yet to come. The sun was dipping below the skyline by the time Becca guided her truck into a private parking area behind an unmarked building in an unassuming neighborhood of Brooklyn. It looked like any other loading dock, a few shipping containers, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and a nondescript steel door at the rear. But as soon as she stepped out of the cab, Karen emerged from the building, a calm yet purposeful expression on her face. I didn't think you'd find this place so quickly, Karen said, scanning the perimeter before embracing her old partner in a quick hug. The Bureau uses this for overflow storage and hush-hush meetings sometimes. We're lucky no one else is here tonight. Relieved to see a friendly face, Becca returned the hug. Thank you, I owe you one. Or 100 by now. Karen's smile was faint but genuine. If we're counting, then we're even. You pulled my backside out of the fire enough times. She gestured for Becca to follow her inside, where an empty office had been hastily converted into a secure spot. You can crash here for the night. I've arranged for a local precinct to keep an eye on the surrounding blocks. That biker gang might have eyes everywhere, so we need to be cautious. After parking her rig in a well-lit corner, Becca carried her essentials into the makeshift hideout. She took a moment to reflect on the day's events, the unease at the diner, the ambush, the confrontation, and the fleeting sense of triumph tinged with the knowledge that trouble still loomed. Even with Karen's support, the threat was far from neutralized. Still, Becca felt a familiar fire burning inside her, the same determined spirit that had driven her in the FBI. She could walk away from conflict when it wasn't her fight, but she couldn't tolerate bullies preying on others. These bikers weren't just random thieves, they were part of a dangerous network that sought to expand their criminal influence. A memory flickered of her training days at Quantico, where instructors hammered home the principle that justice wasn't just about chasing criminals, it was about protecting communities, even if it meant facing personal risk. Karen must have read the resolve in her eyes. Listen, before you get any ideas about infiltrating their hideout or taking them down single-handedly, remember, you're not officially with us anymore. If something goes wrong, I can't guarantee I can bail you out. Becca nodded slowly. I understand, but I can't just ignore this. They'll hurt other drivers, or worse. Karen sighed, rubbing her temples. Let me do some digging. If I can find an official angle, maybe we can launch an operation. In the meantime, stay put, rest, And for God's sake, don't go off on your own. Nightfall draped the city in a patchwork of orange streetlights and neon signs. Becca settled into a battered office chair, staring out the small window that overlooked the parking area. The city's hum reminded her that while she might find temporary refuge here, the conflict was far from concluded. Yet an undercurrent of optimism threaded through her thoughts. She had faced off against a dangerous group and emerged victorious. She had a friend in Karen, a possible lead on shutting down the bikers for good, and the calm conviction that came from knowing she was capable of defending herself and others. For a moment, her thoughts drifted to the farmland of the West or the quiet roads of the Midwest, places she'd driven through that seemed like another world compared to the neon chaos of New York. She remembered why she'd chosen trucking: the freedom, the solitude, the chance to see the broader sweep of life. She wasn't thrilled to be back in the crosshairs of criminal elements, but if it meant safeguarding that sense of peace for herself and others, she'd do what needed to be done. With that resolve, she leaned back, closed her eyes, and allowed herself a small window of rest. Tomorrow would bring another day, another journey, and likely another battle. But for now, in this small corner of Brooklyn, she felt a quiet triumph. She had proven that beneath the guise of an ordinary female truck driver lay a formidable FBI-trained operative, someone not to be underestimated by any outlaw gang that dared to cross her path. From an unexpected ambush on the city streets to the courageous standoff that proved a lone truck driver can stand against a fearsome gang, Rebecca Morgan's journey reminds us that true strength often lies beneath the surface. Rather than surrendering to fear, she tapped into her past FBI training and saved not only herself but also every future driver who could have fallen prey to the gang's schemes. It's a testament to resilience, bravery, and the power of never underestimating the quiet individual. We hope this story left you energized and inspired. If you enjoyed following Rebecca's intense struggle and triumphant victory, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts. Let's continue the conversation, exchange ideas, and explore how we can all stand up for what's right in our own lives. Thank you for listening, and we can't wait to bring you more thrilling tales.